The idea is now we have a debate to examine whether Clive is right or not, because there are two sides to every story. I'm going to introduce the panel in a minute, but we want to make this as interactive as possible. So throughout our discussion, I'm going to be inviting questions from the audience. And please, when I do that, put your hands up, ask whatever you like. It's your chance to ask four real experts anything you want about a very, very fraught and topical issue. So the subject of our debate is housing growth for a bigger society. Can localism deliver? And at the end, we are going to ask you to decide whether localism can deliver housing growth in the big or bigger society. So to introduce the panel first, my far left, I have Richard Thomas, who is a director at Welbeck Land. Those of you who don't know Welbeck, it's a highly regarded developer with controlled by the Howard de Walden estate. So has more recently moved into strategic land, so buying big sites around the place with the idea of working them up for planning permission, selling them on to house builders or working with house builders, as well as being very involved with property in central London. I'm also joined directly to my left is Brian Buckingham, who's head of residential development at Bidwells, again, who are a highly regarded advisor, particularly in and around the home counties. So advising and looking after some very valuable property and land, and interesting to see how Brian thinks localism can affect the wealthier parts of the southeast. And then to my right, Michael Gallimore from Lovells, or Hogan Lovells, I should say, who's now going to give us a tiny bit more of a scene setter before we open it out to the debate. So, Michael, you were going to give us a bit of a timeline, weren't you?
Yes, I just thought it might be helpful to set the context for the localism bill and just to confirm where it is at the moment. The bill's completed its passage through the House of Commons and it starts its committee stage in the House of Lords next week. And I think we're anticipating at the moment, Clive may have a more accurate view, but my understanding is they're looking at royal assent towards the end of the year, perhaps around November, depending on parliamentary time. So I think we all face going into 2012 with the prospect of the bill being law and us all having to get to grips with the new system. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of new legislation or new regulation, secondary legislation coming through over time, but clearly it's going to be upon us pretty quickly. I mean, just a few initial thoughts in terms of the government's direction of travel, and just to really echo what Clive has said. I mean, it seems to me that when the bill came in, the focus was very much on localism and pushing decisions down to the local community and the whole big society agenda, and that was certainly the case at the general election. I think steadily there's been a shift, possibly the government sort of realising the monster it's creating, and a shift towards an increasing emphasis on growth and perhaps more of a pro-development stance from the government. And my perception is that perhaps Greg Clark has taken a bit more of a firm hold over the reins in the last few months. This is a timeline that I just put together to show perhaps how that some of that's evidenced itself in the plethora of announcements and initiatives we've already had in a very short space of time. And I don't know whether that reflects some sort of grand master plan on the part of the government, or whether it's a sort of scattergun approach of random ideas that it's come up with. I have a hunch as to what I think it probably represents. But I think all of this is actually quite a lot of rhetoric, and my interest as a planning lawyer is not just so much in the broad messages, but in the bill itself. And I think we mustn't forget that the structure of the bill and the detail has remained constant over the last several months. It hasn't changed through the Commons debates, and a lot of the concerns that were there when the bill was published remained there. We've still got neighbourhood plans to get to grips with. We've still got continuing concerns about registers of assets of community value, local referendums, and the statutory duty for pre-application consultation. So although the big message is growth and development, the legislation and the structure underpinning it still really harks back to the localism agenda. And from my perspective, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how government are going to resolve what seem to be some emerging tensions in the system.
Okay, right, let's start asking the panel what they think. Our first question to put to the panel, and then we're going to ask you to contribute to, is the localism agenda consistent with housing growth? Richard, what do you think?
I think the answer is probably it's not at this stage. It does depend upon what localism actually means. I have a concern that localism is seen as a sort of a NIMBYist charter by many councils at the moment. But the reality is, when it eventually transpires, then it would be a very clever piece of legislation which gives a political impression that local councils can do as they please. But the reality is they'll do as they please with their hands tied. My best example I can quote you is Waverley Council in Leafy, Surrey, who themselves, post-Pickles, have identified that in both affordable and market housing, there's a requirement for 1,000 houses a year, yet they decide they're going for 150. And so they're going to exacerbate a situation. There is a quandary in the Conservative Party between, on the one hand, them wanting, they understand that houses are unaffordable. They understand that housing construction is an important generator of business. But at the local level, when I go down to public exhibitions, promoting applications we made with our consultants, some of whom are sitting out here, I get it right in the ear. Get it big time in the ear. And the people who give it in the ear are the Tories. Because they're educated, they're living in wealthy parts of the country, and they give it to me big time. And there's that quandary. And the idea that you're going to devolve the decision-making down to local level, when actually, at the local level, you had the traditional Tory grassroots heartland voters, whereas at national level, we've got an economy to restructure, it doesn't work. And at the end of the day, the national policies have to apply.
Brian, is the localism agenda consistent with housing growth? What do you think?
I'm afraid I'm going to follow Richard and say no, but it's actually terribly easy and terribly glib to say no. Clive mentioned the work of Shelter and the representations they made to the Select Committee. I thoroughly recommend a visit to the Shelter website because there's some very good information there. One of the pages on the website says that when they carried out surveys, 72% of people accepted that we need to build more houses in our communities. 50% of people said we would oppose it being built near them. And therein lies the dilemma of localism. We all know we need the housing, but we don't want them near us. Last year we built, I think it was 105,000 houses. Kate Barker talked about 280. We forget that in 1970 we built 400,000 houses. Now, most of those 400,000 houses had sources of funding that came from the public sector. And that is one thing that is missing from delivery of housing is public sector funding.
What are some of your tales from the front line, if you like?
Well, yesterday I had a letter from a house builder. We have a site for sale, not site for sale, a site available for promotion in a very nice settlement in Hertfordshire. And I think your organisation knows, actually, Richard. And we had a letter in from a house builder, and this follows a number of conversations. And they said, look, this is a fantastic area for the house builders amongst us. We're talking revenues £500-600 a foot. Very nice area. My goodness, housing is needed. It's sustainable. It's 200 metres from a railway line straight into London. But the locals will be very well resourced. They'll be very vociferous. They will have very good contacts, and they will be very, very difficult to fight against. We're out. And I think that, again, that's an example from yesterday of a letter we received, and it's one of the dilemmas of localism, I think.
I mean, I think what's interesting is that I'm sure lots of other people heard both ministers and civil servants last year. Their answer to that question would have been, actually, it doesn't have to be, because what they were saying was if local neighbourhoods choose not to have more housing, that is down to them, that is their choice. If they choose to take the financial incentives that will be available, we hope they will, and that will encourage them. Now, that seems to me to have changed, and it's not the message, certainly, that Greg Clark delivered yesterday, which is actually local authorities will have to meet the needs that are out there. So it does seem to me there has been a sort of fundamental change. I think it will only be consistent with growth if local plans, neighbourhood plans, whatever they are forced to actually be consistent with the national framework when it emerges and the requirement to deliver the level of housing that Clive's talked about. It seems to me that unless you've got that control from the top on local councils, monitoring of plans as they're brought forward and somehow bringing into line, then the answer will be no, at least in some areas.
Okay, let's see from the audience, who's got a burning question to start with for our panel? Yes, do you want to just lady at the front first, do you want to shout out?
Yeah, Caroline Thorpe from Housing. I just wondered what the panel thinks the government's drive to bring forward public land for housing on housing growth.
Well, very topical, isn't it? I didn't know if it was quite a new announcement. It was felt like one of those recycled jobs last week, but it certainly made the headlines, didn't it? Brian, you're an expert on land. What's the feeling about that?
Yes, we welcome it because there is a lot of public sector land that is available and is underused in the current uses. Whether there's that much in the southeast, which is where we really need the housing, I'm not quite sure. And I'm going to go slightly off subject because what I'd like to see from the public sector is a whole package that is going to help things go forward. And actually freeing up land, I want to see it really coming through, and I don't want to see the issues that we're going to have with, if anybody has to deal with highways agency, county councils, if Network Rail get involved, if you've got to work through lots of public bodies and go through OJU processes and whatever. I'd quite like to see a coordinated, joined up thinking, I think is the old phrase, approach to actually delivering public sector land and helping deliver the housing that we need.
Our next question is, will financial incentives secure buy-in from neighbourhoods? Now, I'm going to exempt Richard from that because he already said he didn't think so. But Clive, I'm going to ask you to elaborate a bit on that. I mean, you had so much to cover. The new homes bonus, what's your feeling about it? You touched on it a bit, but do you want to add any more to what you had to say on that?
I'm worried that it will actually create the impression that you can buy planning permissions, as I said. I think that would actually take the whole planning process that happens. Of course, if there's a new houses built and there's a shortage of places at local schools, then the community wants to see additional places added to those schools. I've got a very diverse constituency. I've got old industrial areas at one end, which were just written off for more industry, which isn't needed. And I've got green fields at the other end where people don't want to see houses built. We've actually turned it round, so we're zoning more of the old industrial land for housing. There's been a lot of discussion with people, and it's generally been welcomed. But in the end, if you actually develop a plan like that, and then you get an application for a site, and I've had most new house building in Sheffield been built in my constituency in the last 20 years, and somebody comes to say, Mr. Betts, we don't want housing built there. You say, well, actually, we've done a consultation. This is the plan for the city, and that's what the presumption is in favour of. And you can actually change it round. And people still don't like it, but they know it's no use running that individual campaign on that site because the decision's already been made. So I think it's about trying to involve communities in looking at a plan for the whole of the whole of the local authority area and beyond, taking the point, rather than down to this microcosm level where people just will resist.
And no kind of bribe needed, do you think?
I think that it's useful to make sure that the consequences of development, whether it be extra traffic, extra school places, are taken account of. But I think the idea of simply offering money I feel uncomfortable with quite frankly.
Okay. Michael, what do you think? Will financial incentives secure buy-in from neighbourhoods?
I think it depends significantly on where in the country we're talking about. I think in some parts of the country, yes, it will help where there is a recognition that the housing is needed and that money could be put to good use. I think in other parts, particularly in some areas in the southeast, it will make very little difference at all, certainly because of due to the level of the new homes bonus, it's not going to be significant.
Could you just give us in the panel, us in the audience, an idea of some of the sums? Maybe if we were back in Waverley and Surrey, what the council would get for how many homes and how much that might affect a council?
Well, it's graded according to the band of the council tax, so and it's an equivalent amount to the council tax over a 6-year period. The consultation paper on the new homes bonus, I think, had some worked examples, and they showed, I can't remember the precise figures, but they were at a relatively low level,
Sort of
and certainly
single-digit millions?
Yeah.
Or?
No, I mean far less than that per development. And I think the general view was that is not going to be enough to persuade people in areas that in certain areas that it was going to be significant. I think the other critical factor is what is that money going to be used for, and it comes back to one of the points Clive alluded to, which is it going to be perceived as buying a permission and the money then put towards something that's completely unrelated to the development. It seems to me that it's right that if people are going to say, yes, the new homes bonus provides funds and we see as a neighbourhood or locality some benefit coming from that because it's applied in the area and in effect mitigating the development.
Well, we've concentrated on the new homes bonus. Can I just look at another, which is CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy? Infrastructure is one of the things that really concerns me in the way we're moving forward with the way that we develop. We've had 250 years of a natural progression in the order of development, and that is that we put in infrastructure and we think about roads, railways, ports, we think about airports, we put in the infrastructure and then development follows. We're now in an era where we are developing and we're developing alongside the infrastructure going in. Actually, I think we're quickly going through that era, and I think we're going to be trying to develop, and then hopefully the infrastructure is going to come along later. And we have schemes where there will be money put into a pot for education or a road or a roundabout, and everybody's crossing their fingers and hoping that that is going to get delivered. So I think if we're talking about financial incentives in the form of CIL, I don't think that is going to be hugely influential, because I think we're just getting back to par to do something that we should have been doing as a society anyway, and that is investing in proper infrastructure that will service the needs of the country.
Okay. Because at the moment, I think they're largely excluded by their own apathy, one would have to say. You can't say that developers ignore them. I don't think they get involved, but if they were involved...
We actually do tend to get a bit more of a positive response from our local public exhibitions than the younger people than the older. But the older people, as you say, are more in control, and they're the homeowners as well. Occasionally we get letters of support from younger people. I was thinking yesterday, actually, that I bought my first house when I was 26, and the multiplier of my income when I was a junior assistant at Montague Evans, the house price was 3 times. My oldest daughter is now 26, and virtually the same thing is 15 times. It's a serious problem. But I don't know how I can answer your question in the sense that the people who are making the decisions at local level are not the 26-year-olds. The people you're talking to, they recognise their children have a problem buying houses. There is a slight dichotomy, though, in the sense that house prices are what they are because that's what the market demands. So someone's affording it. You know, if it all became unaffordable to everyone, that house prices would plummet. But they're not. They're holding up. I suspect there's a bit of inheritance coming through these days because of the rise in the house prices so significantly over the last several decades.
The reality for many young people is they want a home of any kind, and they'll want a home to rent to begin with because of the problems of affordability. And you know that's it's going to be a big challenge for us about identifying that as a priority that we're prepared to fund.
Will the planning reform speed up or delay housing delivery? I'm going to start with Clive again because, you know, everyone's moaning about localism, but they always used to moan about the old system. What would you have done to improve it, Clive, or would you have just left it all alone?
No, I think there's one thing we haven't been very good at, and I say the 2004 Act was brought in primarily because the UDPs were taking so long to produce that they thought they'd have a brand new system, you know, with a local development framework, which is taking just as long to produce. So I think we ought to put requirements in place and probably slightly simpler systems to have local plans for a local authority area that were more up to date and more flexible and refined more often. I think that's one of the problems we got sitting in a very long, incredibly resource intensive arrangement.
We all need to be working far closer together. It always used to be hostile, developers, local authorities, and the forgotten party in this is actually landowners, because landowners, if you want to deliver developments, you've got to build them on land, and you've got to persuade the landowners that he must make his land available. So we genuinely have to be working together. And one of the spin-offs of that is that we actually end up with better schemes and we have better developments. So I think localism on its own will not speed up delivery, but I think we can see a comprehensive package from the public sector and from the public side that will help to bring things forward. I think I've said what I've said on infrastructure. I think there's a massive infrastructure deficit, particularly in the southeast of England, and I think contributions through SIL, however, is just trying to catch up. But we're not going to catch up. I mean, I operate mostly in Cambridge. A study was done around Cambridge to say there's a deficit of 2 billion in the infrastructure around Cambridge. Well, it's an awful lot of Section 106 and SIL contributions to get up to 2 billion, and that puts every site in Cambridge as being unviable.
Okay, and last point now then from Michael.
It was just to add on the sort of SIL point, that Section 106 has lots of problems, we all know that, but one of the big advantages of it is you have a document that says how much the developer's paying and what it's going to be used for, and everyone can see that, and it is actually quite a transparent system. The problem the government has still not addressed with SIL is what is the money going to be used for and where do you get your guaranteed delivery, and developers basically writing a cheque, handing it over, but not having the first idea of what the council is going to use it for when that money is paid. And the government have said, well, we're now going to have an element of it retained for at the local level. Well, how much, and still what is it going to be used for? So I think the infrastructure, actually the delivery is still going the wrong way.
Okay. Well, planning always used to seem to me like rather a dry subject, but it's got very interesting in the last year and a half, say. I think it's been a really intriguing discussion. Thank you also for all your contributions. We now have the matter of our vote. Housing growth in the bigger society. Can localism deliver? Those that believe it can deliver, please put your hands up. Okay. Very good.
Why not?
Okay, and those that think it can't deliver. Right. Well, I think the motion is defeated. It has been a great